we're here with the author Mengtong Li from the paper Mixed Keying or Desirability-Matching in the Construction of Forced Choice Measure, an empirical investigation and practical recommendations, published in the April 2025 issue of the Organizational Research Methods Journal. Mengtong, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for giving the opportunity, and I'm grateful for having this opportunity to share our work. Yeah.
Yes, and as always, for the interview today, we'll listen to the author experience behind this paper, their motivation of this paper, their experience with the review process, as well as their perception and evaluation of the current research and how to move this research forward. So to start off, Mengtong, can you give us a brief highlight of this paper?
We kind of write this paper, we kind of develop this paper because we are aware of the benefits that forced choice measure can bring. Like it can be beneficial in reducing faking and a lot of response biases. But of course, these benefits, we know that they are heavily hinged upon whether this forced choice measure is properly designed. So to kind of like answer this question, our paper basically do two things. So first, using the investigation part, we answered what is considered as a properly designed forced choice measure. That is, we need to balance social desirability and also mixed keying. And we empirically prove that it's possible to make this a balance. And the second part, the practical recommendation part, what we do is we provide a lot of useful tools, really practical tools, handy tools to help researchers to achieving a goal of developing a properly designed forced choice measure. So this is basically what our paper is trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And can you talk more about how did you start this paper? What motivate you to start this paper?
Oh, yeah, sure. So to answer this question, I think this should really date back to like a couple years ago, like the earlier years in my PhD. And it is really highly relevant to how I developed my interest in the area of forced choice. So kind of like quick like a coincidence. So at that time, I think it's just like my first year or like only earlier second year of my PhD, and at that time, I was still struggling of developing a topic that I need to study. And it was a time when I was attending Fritz's meeting, Dr. Fritz Strassler's meeting, that meeting. And during that time, I heard about a lot of terms from Bo and also from Tianjun, who are also the author on this
Hmm.
manuscript. I heard of them talk about many terms like for choice, single statement, and etc., and a lot of RT stuff. So it was it wasn't until then that I later start to know that okay, what is forced choice? Forced choice is really nothing more like putting several statements batched together in some way. It's really very similar to like putting several statements together and then we try to rank it or try to like pick some
Hmm.
good statements out of some bad ones. It's really like that kind of format. Um, and during the lab meeting conversation, I just realized from um I kind of like realized the state of the art in this field is like at that time, like several years ago, people are still struggling on making the best match among a ton of possibilities. So during that time, like the development of forced choice measures is really like we have a lot of like already developed single statement measures and a lot
Hmm.
of like, parameters or like ratings on how good or bad they are. And the next thing is to people try to manually pick several statements together, try to match them in some way, like making them similarly good or similarly bad, or they need to just place some statements that have similar item properties together, or sometimes they need to put some statements that have very different item properties together. So during that time, like these processes are always done in a very like manual way, and people try a lot of possibilities, a lot of trials and errors, and maybe it needs to take a lot of time to fully develop a fortress measure from a batch of single statement measures. That's what we had like in I think it's like before the year of 2022, I should say. So I kind of like I kind of understood this question, the problem during their conversation. So I think because in my thoughts, I think of developing FC as all right. It's really like we have a lot of like mathematical constraints, and what we are trying to do is to just finding a best match given these explicit constraints. It's really like just like an optimization problem, basically. If we use a computer science framework, it's really like an optimization. So I got my bachelor's degree in computer science, so I know a bit about some algorithms. So I convert the problem of developing fortress measures into really like a mathematical problem, and I managed to use one of the classic algorithms that I learned during my undergrad years and use it to automatically construct the fortress measures. And yeah, that's why that's how I really start thinking about developing an R package from scratch. I got a lot of support from Bo and Tianjun, who are also the co-authors of the autoFC R package. So eventually, that's what we developed, and unfortunately, it has been a very handy tool for researchers and also practitioners for developing their own fortress measures. Yeah, so and this is kind of only the first half of the story where what about how I was motivated to work on this paper. So it's really like having a tool like this, having a handy tool, automatic tool like this, though again, it kind of motivated me to further think that, all right, so you have handy tool like this. Why don't we just make some papers out of this like initial good tool? So he suggested maybe we can start developing a manuscript. Like you have a full choice, you have a tool that can develop like hundreds of measures like in seconds. So why don't we just pick several of them and let's just see if these parallel forms can perform similarly? And yeah, so the initial prototype of this manuscript is simply try to test parallel forms of four choice measures and see whether they perform good or bad. But it's a prototype. And when we kind of like finish this prototypical part, both Bo again started saying, well, let's just try to develop, we extend our scope further. Because in the fortress field, we were still struggling about, there are a lot of scholars based on simulation studies, they are struggling about whether is it possible to keep both psychometric properties and thinking resistance together based on based on simulations, many researchers saying, well, it's very hard or unlikely to do that. So we are trying to see that, well, if we have the tool to develop millions of possible like different scales, is is it even more likely to kind of like find a balance between psychometric properties and kind of like faking resistance. So we kind of like extend our scope to see whether we can find an empirical balance between all those constraints in developing fortress measures. So yeah, it's really like one step and one step further, one step further. It's like push, like we only aim at like doing a small improvement right at the start, but like as we extend further into this process, like all of us started to know that well, we can make a bigger contribution, or even like make things more substantial. So this like this one step by step process really kind of like motivated me and motivate all the authors further and further, and eventually out come to the eventual form of this paper.
Yes, I think that's really interesting of how, in your early years in your PhD training that you see this problem and you want to develop a tool to not just help yourself, but other scholars to make the process more efficient and more optimized. And then it's become a bigger and bigger contribution as you and your co-authors study more about the topic. And with that, can you share with us some experience during the review process? How does that look like for you? What are some of the valuable lessons or experience that you gained from that process for this paper?
Oh, yes, thank you for the opportunity to share this. When people ask me about this question, it's kind of like I always start talking until people have to cut me off. That's what happened.
We're all
That's what
ears.
always do. So yeah, where should I start? So in the past, so I should say that in the previous several minutes of talking, it's really like just like half of the story about developing this whole paper.
Hmm.
I was really grateful for having collaborators like Bo, Tianjun, Lingyue, and also Professor Anna Brown for making this paper really, really, really good and being really motivating all the time. And we should also be very grateful for our editor for kind of like pushing the contribution of this paper even further. So before we so the during the initial submission, this paper is all about empirical investigation. It has nothing
Hmm.
to do with critical recommendations. But our editor kind of like suggested, well, you can add in some practical recommendation, provide a tutorial, and that's what we really did in the later round of the revision. And you know that if you read the paper through, you can see that like maybe like more than 50% of the lengths are all devoted to the tutorials or the practical recommendation. Yes, that's what we added from round one to round two.
Hmm.
Well, and during the review process, well, this manuscript we developed a let me see, so we devoted so from ever since from the time where Bo suggested, well, let's write a paper about parallel force form, from the time where we have the spark of inspiration of like doing a paper like this, and all the way to submission. I think it took like more than one. I think it took like 1 year and a half for doing this, and during the first round of like submission, well, this manuscript did not really come into favor in the first round during the review process, and it was like most reviewers seem to want to basically reject this paper outright. So at that time, I think that the best term I can think of about describing that position is really like we were literally on a hanging thread. But we were just barely saved by our editor, who also really gracefully suggested that who gracefully gave us a chance to save ourselves and suggested that we can add in the part called the practical recommendations. So that's what you see in the title and empirical investigation and practical recommendations. Those practical recommendations are kindly suggested by our editor. So I should owe this to so again, I should owe this to our author team who worked really diligently in developing the whole new section, and also to our editor for giving this great suggestion. Well, another part of this the lesson that I learned from from this review process is that well, the whole revision process, along with a few other papers that was also under revision at that time, was also kind of like happened at my like lowest time in the PhD training during my third and fourth years. And because at that time I basically just had nothing published, and like I have nothing published except for the autoFCR package, which was developed like way earlier than that. So like during that time and from that time to the year like I think the whole 2023 and also the first half of 2024 is really like well nothing came out and everything is just under review. And on one part I'm really having faith in the value of what I'm doing. I believe that these things are going to be published. They are going to make a good contribution to the field. But on the other part, there's no one who can give me a definite answer of like, okay, how are these things going to come out, and when is the waiting process going to end, and how long should I take in just like getting everything and just get everything coming out? Well, yeah, it was the hardest time that I have, and a lot of time is spent in just like waiting, working. And I'm like, I think like in in quite a long period of time. What I was doing every time is like when I woke up, I just log into the editorial, like the editor online editorial platform, and look at the status of manuscript, and hopefully sometime when I just try to refresh, I got suddenly got some updates in it. Yeah, that's what I've been doing for the for like continuously in like for several months. Um, so I think so now looking back on the time where I was like waiting for everything to publish and also very worried about graduation, whether I can
Mm.
graduate, whether I can just finish this PhD process. What I want to think of is that like, well, yeah, it's like the revision process is random. Like even if you trust that you are going to make it, it may take like 1 month or like several years just to get something published.
Mhm.
So I think one lesson I have learned from the whole process is, well, no matter what, I should trust in what I'm doing and trust in the value of the work don't just don't give up. Yeah,
Yeah,
just don't give up.
I think what I hear is really a story about persistence, how you continuously persist to push the paper forward, and also, right, integrate the feedback from the editor to make the paper a much better version, and very strong collaboration among co-author teams as well. So thank you for sharing that. It's really inspiring of like how the team has pushed through the review process together and also the helpful feedback from the editors and the reviewers that helped the paper, the version that it is today. So
Yes.
during your work with this paper and also, your research in forced choice responses in general, what is your evaluation of the research around forced choice responses in organizational research as of right now?
So how should I understand this question? Do you want me to evaluate the like the progress of this field, or
Yeah, I think it's
what do you want
it's
to
more of
understand?
how like your thoughts about, current research regarding the topics that relate to this paper. So the topic that I picked out is four-story respond, but maybe you have other idea of maybe desirability in responses from participants. So just like current research around this topic in general, what is your view on that? And to build upon that as well, how do you think, what are some directions that scholars can take this research forward?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think I got some inspiration from your last few words. It's like, yeah, what kind of like thing that is worth further research? I think I can start on this question first. Um, so like I've always been excited about like our fellow researchers who are also doing research in like fellows who are also studying portrait measurement, and I'm very glad to see a lot of like methodological advancements or like it got applied to like many other areas or like in many other samples. So I think the simplest thing that we can do in portrait measure is I think the first aspect is like kind of like find a lot of like further optimization techniques about voltage measurement because even though our paper provided some good guidelines of like how we develop these portrait measures, how do we make them a powerful tool. There are a lot of like design details that is still worth like further investigation, which I think are worth a lot of simulations or like empirical studies to see if there are a lot of nuances in the designs that we need to better pay attention to. Um, so it's really like getting closer to on designing and optimize for scale so that it can really reveal its full potential. So another area would be like we could use this like revitalized revitalized form of measurement into many, many other like research fields, not only in organizations, or not only in organizational research, but also due to other like substantive fields, maybe in developmental psychology, maybe in clinical psychology, or maybe in social psychology. Is really like it can be a useful tool because a lot of other areas are like a lot of other areas which are heavily dependent on using these like assessment tools. They are also very worried about response bias in general, and much of them are also kind of like concerned with like social desirability responding. So it's also my genuine hope to use this measurement tool into other substantive fields and also apply them to various samples other than like working adults. Yeah, I think I hope I answered your question.
Yes, and I think it's inspiring to kind of like see the application of the tool, not just only in organizational research, but also the potential for interdisciplinary and yeah, application in other field of research as well that use the similar assessment tool. So do you have any advice for scholars who who will want to use or are interested in using forced choice responses or who are interested in developing tools to improve the process, such as you developing like this tool to really optimize creating forced choice measures. What are some of the advice you have for scholars?
You mean the applies for scholars who are interested in studying this topic or using these
Yes.
tools?
Hmm.
Hmm, let me see. Hmm. So let me see. So let me see what right is like. The use of social is really like a method is like a methodological innovation. Of course,
Hmm.
still for researchers who are from other fields, the most important part is still their own research question. But I do hope that our use of these, like innovative measurement format could help researchers kind of like develop like new insights regarding the relationship between a lot of variables. Maybe that like using for choice when a lot of like response biases got removed. Maybe the conclusions based on for choice scores became different from the conclusions on the conclusion based on the Likert scores. It's possible to see things like that. Um,
Hmm.
it may kind of like sh shape our understanding on pre like or a shape our previous understanding. And maybe that a lot of things can get like changed as a result. I'm
Hmm.
not saying that I'm expecting that, but I will say that do I do think there's a possibility of like seeing some change like this, and I'll say that for researchers who are interested in studying using fortress measures, yeah, definitely look at our paper and also a lot of papers that we cited in the
Hmm.
manuscript, which are really useful tools for you to understand how fortress work and also how like some possible nuances that should be noticed when you really want to use this tool. Yeah, again, it's like read our paper and also read the papers that we cited.
Hmm.
Those are really those cited papers are also really good resources that help us build an understanding and potentially find a lot of like useful tools for helping you develop. And I have something that is specifically for those who want to specifically study this field,
Hmm.
not as a researcher who only want to use Fortran as a tool, but as a researcher who really want to dive into the like the whole Fortran measurement field. It's like,
Hmm.
well, it's unlike many other substantive fields where you may tell a great story that can intrigue others easily. These are like four choices about all is mostly about research methods,
Mm-hmm.
and four choices is only a very tiny part in the whole research method field.
Mm-hmm.
So the study of research method itself is less dramatic and it's more about doing something solid and fully convincing. Yeah, doing something that's solid and fully convincing is really very important in research method area. And I think four choice is a good example. Like you need to know about a lot about the underlying theory, but you also need to know a lot about programming and also technical details. So it's much less dramatic than studying a substantive fields. So for anyone who is really interested in trying to dive in this topic, I would say it's really important to always have faith in your work and
Mm-hmm.
also be very clear about what values your work can bring. For me, I do believe that forced choice is a good methodological breakthrough that will continue to prove its value in the long run. So specifically for my short advice for new researchers who want to dive in this field, I would say have faith and
Mm-hmm.
also never give up. And finally, that's good luck.
Yes. Thank you. Very, very helpful advice, and great resources from your paper and also the paper that's being cited. How to use forced choice as a different approach with a different theoretical lens that will generate new insights and also the experience and the faith in the value of the work that you're doing. And I think it's apply for this field, but also for all the scholars in general. So really thank you for sharing those. And before we wrap it up, is there any other thoughts that you want to share with the audience that we have not touched on today?
Well, let's see. I think there is a question about like the key takeaways. You want us to list two key takeaways from the paper, so also
Mhm.
prepare that question.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. So the first takeaway is like there are a lot of benefits in using the fortress method, so it's
Mhm.
well worth trying it. Yes, it's well worth trying. And the second one is if you do want to try it, then you can try to use our tools, which can help you develop good fortress measures easier than ever, and it will be in a fully replicable way. I do think that like replicability
Mhm.
in science should be placed more emphasis than ever. And this is especially the case in the research method area where you need to develop a lot of code for implementing your research methods. So I think the replicability part in this area is even more important than a substantive area. I do think that like even if we do substantive study, we should place a lot of emphasis on like, well, how can we our conclusion replicate in one way or another?
Mhm.
It's also something that I always inspire myself and also my fellow colleague on like, well, you need to do something and save it. And maybe in the future, like 5 years or 10 years later, when someone run our code, they got exactly the same result as ours.
Mhm.
Well, that's something that I really want to see. Something we really want to see for our work.
Thank you, Mengtong, for your time today, and really appreciate you and your team work in developing this tool for scholars and bringing forestry measures closer to the organizational scholars and also scholars in other fields as well.
Yeah, thank you. I was grateful for this opportunity and also very proud of like being on this author team for publishing this work.
Yes, yes. Congratulations again. That's huge achievement. Congratulations to you and your team.